Today's forum is the Arc of Climate Justice in Duluth, bending towards better home heating. Since April is Earth Month, happy Earth Month, everyone. To celebrate and take action, join Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light's Northern Minnesota Director, Bret, Pence, for a forum that's going to explore different ways that Duluthians and our surrounding community members interested in saving the planet, their money, and promoting local justice can contribute their own and Duluth's clean energy transition through supporting fossil fuel heating alternatives. Bret's work focuses on supporting the lively volunteer network in northern Minnesota, of which he has been a member since its inception in 2014. He's a wonderful presenter, a wonderful friend, and we're lucky to have him. Bret, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Bret. It is so great to be with you, you viewers. Wonderful. You've been a wonderful supporter of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light over the years that we've been here. And I just thank you for inviting me, and also for inviting me to speak on this topic. I think Bret is the one who really kind of prompted this topic. Sally was also an helper on convincing me to do this topic. And sometimes you need a topic like this to put your thoughts together. So you're my guinea pigs today. We'll go through this. I thought what we'd do is I'd intro, the way I'll talk today is we'll do an intro of MNIPL, just very briefly about who we are and what we do. Then we'll really get into climate change in 5 minutes or 7 minutes. What we've learned from the 3 different IPCC reports that have come out, and how natural gas or methane is a part of that. And then we'll dive into Duluth and how when we're thinking globally, we need to act locally, and how gas is, my main point I'm gonna articulate is that if we're gonna work on climate solutions in Duluth, natural gas and what we do with it and how we don't use it has to be a really big part of our conversation. So that's where I'm going today, and I'll use slides. There may be times during the presentation where you have questions. It's okay to put them in chat for me. I may not always be looking at the chat when I'm presenting, but that's fine. There'll also be a couple times during the presentation where I'll ask to get your thoughts, and we'll do that just at least during the course of the presentation via chat. So if you know how to use that chat function, great. If not, you can physically raise your hand and come on camera, and I can try and call on you. So sound good? All right, let's launch. Hardest part is just getting to the screen. Aha, okay. So a little bit about Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We work with all different faith communities on the topic of sustainability, and specifically on climate justice issues. That is the combination of the climate change transformation that's happening right now as a result of human activities, and the social justice issues that are often at the heart of that, and are caused by that. And we work to bring faith communities into that larger climate justice movement, global climate justice movement, and then also strive to work with different communities to try and bring solutions back into those places. So we try to learn from those communities and also hopefully provide some solutions to those. Okay, so in terms of the climate, we have had, here's our very thin piece of atmosphere around the planet. We have had some striking reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That is the respected group of scientists that are working through the United Nations to report, to collect the science and then report to us about what's happening. We've had 3 different reports over the last 18 months. The first one was really talking about the physical effects, what's happening, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. The second report we'll also just to touch a little bit on is just the effects of that. And then the third report, which came out just recently, is on mitigation, or what changes we could make to have an impact on that. And this is an old slide deck. We're way beyond some of these things, but this is just showing that we've had temperature fluctuations over time within the global climate system. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of years in terms of the time scale on this slide deck. And of course, what we now know through science, and what we've known for quite some time now, is that our human activities primarily from the burning of fossil fuels, have really increased the amount of carbon dioxide. And I'm going to also extend that just to all greenhouse gases, since we'll be talking a lot about methane today, which is the second largest driver of global warming. And what this has done is it's really that nice little insulation of atmosphere that we saw at the very beginning of the slide. It has thickened that in a way that it's keeping heat inside and it's changing our planet. Let's see if I can keep moving forward. Okay. So what we know from the IPCC report, the first one that's talking about the physical aspects of what's happening in terms of climate changes, climate change is happening very rapidly. We are warming very rapidly. We've already seen over 1 degree Celsius of warming, and we're already feeling, I think all of us in northern Minnesota can understand that we're feeling the impacts of that already. If you think about the fires last year, the smoke we had in town, if we think about the drought that occurred, if we think about the flood that we had in 2012, so the effects of that are already happening. And one of the key things that the report has stated is that if we don't, what we need to do right now is to try to have our emissions, all emissions on the planet by the end of this decade. That's a really, really tall order. And we'll talk, there are ways to do it. We'll talk about how that can be done. If we can have those emissions, then that graph I showed you earlier, we would start bending the curve. And I think we're all familiar with that in terms of the pandemic. We had a pandemic where cases were really ramping up and we social distanced. We put on our mask. Not all of us, but most of us. We took vaccines. We did things to bend the curve so that our hospitals wouldn't get overwhelmed. And we did that as a society. Our hospitals were really stressed. I'm married to a nurse, so I don't want to say our hospitals weren't totally overwhelmed, but our system did not collapse, in part because of actions we took to bend that curve. And that's what really needs to happen in terms of climate change. Again, to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is the goal. That's not a magic number, but that is the number that science has determined that probably is the highest number that's safest to go, and then we can start drawing down carbon. So the idea is bend the curve by 2030, get to a carbon neutral place by 2050-ish, and then start drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere. That's generally the prescription here. I wanted to just highlight these three pictures. This is all fossil fuel extraction. These are all fossil fuel extraction activities that are serving Minnesota. They're not happening in Minnesota, but these are all fossil fuel activities that are serving us. We're buying gasoline from these activities, or we're buying electricity as a result of these activities, or the natural gas that's heating our homes and our buildings and helping us with other industrial processes. So this would be tar sands oil extraction in Canada. On the upper left, we have mountaintop removal of coal in one picture there, and then we have fracking for oil and gas in North Dakota in the bottom picture. So these are all activities that are occurring that we benefit from in terms of getting those natural gases, but the other thing that ties all these things together is that they all also emit natural gas. You may be extracting natural gas directly from some of these processes, but all of them also emit natural gas, which is one of the causes of global warming. So again, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on natural gas, or I'm going to call it methane for the rest of this presentation. Natural gas is really a marketing term that was developed in the 50s to sell methane. Methane is natural, but arsenic is also natural. So I think what happens, what we can think about oftentimes when we put the label natural on something is that it's benign, and methane is not benign. It is useful for us in terms of an energy source. So we should say, but it's also one of the key drivers of climate change. So it is the second largest greenhouse gas in terms of its contribution to climate change. It's probably responsible for what, at this point, from what science is telling us and what IPCC is telling us, of 25% of all warming is attributed to methane. Methane comes from all kinds of places. There are natural processes. If we talk, you might have heard methane as a result of cattle operations. This would be cattle burps. Sometimes you hear it as cattle farts, but it would be really cattle burps that are causing that methane from those areas. And that is a significant source. So particularly as we industrialize our agricultural system, we see more and more of that. Wetlands wetlands do produce methane. Another place you might find it is that when permafrost is melting, we get release of methane that way. So as climate change advances and we get more methane released from permafrost melting, that works as a feedback loop, which we'd like to stop. But the other thing we do know at this point is that the majority of all methane that's being released in the atmosphere at this point are coming from human beings. They're coming from our processes. So that can be landfills, that can be industrial agriculture, as I told you about, but really a ton of it is from fossil fuels. So that would be all those slides I showed you earlier. And one thing we know right now that we didn't know 10 years ago is how much of our processes in terms of trying to get natural gas to the spot are leaky. And that's what this picture is. This is a picture of fugitive emissions around the world. So the darker the color, the more emissions that are being leaked out. And you can think of pipelines, you can think of the extraction of where you're actually drawing something out of the ground. And you'll see from space now, we have satellites that are looking, we can see plumes of methane being released. Flaring, if you've driven through North Dakota at night, you've probably seen these weird landscapes of lit up landscapes that's flaring from some of these rigs. The flaring is to try to burn off the methane because they're not capturing it, and they don't, instead of venting it right in the atmosphere, they flare it, but flaring doesn't burn it all. So look, if you can just look at everywhere on this map, we have a tremendous amount of methane being released from our extraction of fossil fuels. And this has a big impact on how we understand this is methane is a role in terms of global the climate warming problem, global warming. I'm gonna go back for a second. I want to make one last point on this. When we look at what the responsibility of different greenhouse gases, one of the things we constantly get from fossil fuel industry would be that their leakage rate is really low. Constantly they've said their leakage rate is 1% or lower. And that's why in the past, I'm old, I'm 52. So I remember 12 years ago in my early 40s that natural gas was a bridge fuel to a different future. And it's really a bridge to nowhere is what we're finding at this point. We do have this fuel, it does burn cleanly, but when you have so much leakage, if you have 4% leakage, like remember the industry reporting is about 1% leakage. If you have 4% leakage, that would be the equivalent, the fossil fuel equivalent of burning coal. It's not quite as dirty as burning coal in terms of all the other metals and things like that, but in terms of its fossil fuel impact on global warming, it's the same as coal if you have a leakage of 4%. What we're finding now from satellite pictures is our leakage rate is 6 to perhaps 12%. So it is a huge, huge problem. And it is a huge opportunity as well, because one of the other things about methane is that unlike carbon dioxide, which stays in the atmosphere for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then is cleaned out by natural processes, methane, when it goes in the atmosphere, while it's 80 times more effective at trapping gas, it does dissipate within a 10-year span, typically. It gets broken down by radiation in the atmosphere. So the key thing is, if we can plug these leaks, and if we can stop using natural gas and putting it in the atmosphere, we can really bend that curve a lot faster than if we did other things. So it is a key focus in the IPCC reports. And if you remember, we had a global kind of a climate change conference in Glasgow, Scotland last year. There was a lot of disappointment that came out of that, but there were some positive things that came out of that conference. And one was a real focus, international focus on methane, where 100 countries signed an agreement to really reduce their methane by 30% by the end of this decade. So thank goodness it's finally, this is an opportunity waiting to happen, is the low-hanging fruit to bend that curve. I just put this picture in there because, again, that second report from the IPCC is about effects. I talked about some of the effects a little bit, but maybe in the chat right now, if you have time, you could just put in the chat some of the effects that you've noticed in this area. This is a stock picture from the 2012 flood we had in Duluth. It just happens to be that I'm in that picture with my kids. If you look on the guy in the kind of standing with his hands on his hips on the left-hand side, that's myself, a much younger self 10 years ago, examining this flood, which was not far from my house. So this is big rainfall events, or one of these impacts that are happening in our area. One of the things that we know is the effects of global warming will be global, but they won't happen the same in every region. Each region is going to have a different impact. And one of ours is rain events are expected to be much more up and down, where we might have drought years and then a lot of rain at once. And I think we've experienced both of those things over the last 10 years and continue to experience them. I can't see your chat at the moment, so if you're putting stuff in the chat, thank you. Well, I'm going to just check here. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. So the final IPCC report that came out just last, I believe it was just last week, was basically saying it's a mitigation report. It's about what can we do? And the report was basically saying, hey, world, wake up. We don't have a lot of time, but don't lose hope, because there are solutions to this. There isn't any new technology that we need to invent. Yes, new technological solutions and innovation will be really helpful, but we don't need that. What we really need to do is deploy some of the things that we know work right now to get off these, to wean ourselves off fossil fuels and bend that curve in the next 10 years. And these are pictures that just exhibit, just examples of some of that. Some of it's just as simple as the old insulation and the, insulation and plugging air leaks in your house is one huge thing. And we'll talk more about that for Duluth. Solar, energy efficiency, all kinds of stuff. So let's talk a little bit more about Duluth. So I'm moving now from our look globally at kind of climate change and IPCC reports and how natural gas fits into that, into Duluth. So this is taken directly from our city website, and we have a fantastic sustainability coordinator, Mindy Granley, now, who has really put a lot of information on there. So these are our emissions from a site that was Regional Indicators Initiative that was collecting this information. So a couple of things I want to highlight here that I think are something to bring up. So one is the fact that if you look at this slide, you can see we have a lot of natural gas that's being used. So the light blue is the residential gas, the pink is commercial gas. You put those two together. These are, again, this is 2013 to 2018 over time. The second thing to really notice is that our overall emissions have gone down over that time, but it's not because of natural gas. Natural gas seems to stay about the same in both those areas. What has gone down are emissions from electricity, on the residential electricity and commercial electricity. That's because we are cleaning up our electricity system. So that's because of requirements we put in this state in 2007, called the Next Generation Energy Act, that required utilities to move to cleaner sources of electricity. And because of other choices that utilities have made, our own utility, investor-owned utility, electric utility for this region, Minnesota Power, has moved in the last 15 years, so 2005 to 2020 at least, from 95% coal to around 50% coal. So that's why you're seeing these big changes, and that's fantastic. But we're not seeing that on the natural gas side, right? Natural gas continues to be natural gas. The other thing that is really interesting about this is that this assumes these emission sort of indicators here assume that natural gas has that 1% leakage rate, which it does not. So if we actually factored in how much gas is being lost in both in the extraction and transmission of that resource to here, and then the leakage rates actually from your appliances in town, it would be much, much larger. And we know this data is going to change, that methane in town that's supplied by our city-owned methane utility, Comfort Systems, or natural gas utility, is a huge contributor to global warming. That's one of our big contributors. You can also see the transportation here really hasn't changed that much over time as well. So it's been on the electric side. So what we really need to get our hands around this issue. Oh, I'm going to go back. Let's see if I can go back here. Okay. So one other thing to note here is on the gas side. Another interesting point is that if you look at the gas, there's residential gas and commercial gas. The residential gas is a larger figure. It shows that we are supplying more of our natural gas is being used on the residential side than on the commercial side. That's unusual, and compare that to the electricity sector, which is the opposite. So much of our natural gas, in terms of its usage, is being supplied to people heating their homes or using natural gas in their homes in Duluth. So we have an opportunity there, right? Because if we change that, we can change our gas, our gas usage, our amount of methane we're using. But there are challenges to that. There are some really significant challenges to that. Oh, I skipped over this slide. Before I get into the challenges, and particularly in Duluth, I want to say one last thing. Look, I think I've got a little time. This spaghetti chart is really fantastic. I try to use it in all kinds of spaces. Often use it for energy efficiency. Basically, it's all on the left-hand side of the chart. It's got all the energy sources, within Minnesota, and there are charts for this for the world and for the United States. They're fantastic. Then on the right side, it shows, what's happening to those sources. And there's this huge figure that's in gray called rejected energy. And rejected energy is wasted energy. That means it's not being used. It is waste. It is the inefficiency of our energy system. So you can see almost 2/3 of our energy is rejected. I think that shocks people, and it should. But there's a good reason for it. It's not because of you leaving your lights on. Even if you leave your lights on, that would be a minuscule part of what's happening here. And if everyone left their lights on, it would still be a minuscule part. What's really happening here is much of our energy is wasted because we burn things. And so the prescription for going forward is to get rid of this waste and reapply it into our processes. And the way we do that is through not burning things, whether that be coal, natural gas, oil, even trees, right? We're going to try to not burn things, because when you burn something, if you think about it, if you burn gasoline for your car, 80% of the energy is wasted as heat. You're really just trying to turn wheels in your car. Yes, we're Duluthians. Yes, it's cold. Yes, we need a heater in the car in the winter, but you don't need that much. So, that is one example where if you move to an EV car, 90% of the energy now goes to turning the wheels, as opposed to 20% for an internal combustion engine. The same thing happens when you burn coal for electricity or gas for electricity. You're losing a tremendous amount of energy when you burn something as pollution, either heat pollution or light pollution, or the pollution of combustion, of different things being put out in combustion. So the general plan, to wrap our heads around this, that Duluth is going to be trying to participate in over the next 10 years, is clean up electricity, with renewables. So we're using less fossil fuels, electrify everything we can, again, so we're not burning things, finding some fossil fuel or some clean fuels as substitute for fossil fuels in those areas that we can't electrify. And there are some sticky areas like that, but they're relatively small in terms of the global number. And that is the way we bend the curve, and then get to a system that is sort of a net zero system. So I'm sorry I missed that. Now we've got our Duluth frame and thinking about how we electrify everything, and we see we have this this big chunk of natural gas is even bigger than on these charts that we need to address. Okay, so why don't we just address them? Well, there are some challenges here, and a lot of the challenges I think we know about instinctively as Duluthians, and you can go ahead and put down in the chat some of the challenges you might see in moving forward in that. I think one of the biggest challenges we have in our community is that if we move to electrify using the older technology to electrify our buildings for heat, we would have huge electric bills because we have huge long winters, extremely cold and long winters. I'm going to try to see you on the thing, but maybe you could raise your hand if you've ever had your furnace on in Duluth in June. You can put your chat. Just think about it. Have you put your furnace on in August? As I thought about this question, I thought the only month I haven't turned on my furnace for, even if just a small blip of time where would be probably July. I think every other month I've had my furnace on in Duluth at some capacity. And many months, of course, we know it's on all that we just have to have it on all the time. So that is a huge challenge when we have a natural gas infrastructure that's owned by the public that's delivering gas to heat these homes so that we can live in this area. So that is one of our really big challenges. Not every place is as cold as Duluth, as I think most of us know, right? And Mark Twain knew that really well when he said the coldest winter we ever spent was a summer in Duluth. So we also have in terms of the state of Minnesota, we have the oldest housing stock in the state of Minnesota. So we have old leaky homes that we are trying to heat up, and that is an inefficient scenario. So we need to fix those homes, and that is expensive to do. So that is a challenge that we have. We have our community as a high rate of poverty, is about twice the rate of the state in terms of the amount of poverty in our city. So we have a lot of people that don't have money to put into those kind of projects to make those homes more efficient, or to move off of natural gas to some kind of new system. And those folks have a high amount because they are poor, and that's about almost 20% of the city that's below the federal poverty rate. That's a huge chunk of our city. And by the way, our unemployment rate's about 3%. So that means we have a ton of people who are working poor in this town that are really affected by our winters and by high costs of heating these leaky old buildings. Okay, that's called energy burden. If you have more than 6% of your income towards energy burden, then that's called that is the definition of energy burden. If you're putting more than 6% of your income towards energy, and we have some places in town where they're putting 10, 12, even as much as 20 or 30%. So it's a really big problem that we have here. So that is a challenge. Further, in terms of the folks that do live in poverty in Duluth, 75% of those folks are in rentals, it looks like. And if you're in a rental, we have a split. We have a hard way that presents a hard situation in terms of coming up with fixing those buildings or fixing those energy systems, because you have a renter that's living there that can't put in the money to that and doesn't have any incentive to do so. You also have the owner of the building who is often just passing along the cost of heating the building or electrifying the building to the renter, and thus they don't have an incentive. So it's called this split incentive system that is really difficult. So that is a big challenge that we have. So we have a lot of different challenges. And the final challenge I'll state is that because we have a public infrastructure to deliver natural gas to all these homes, we have an incentive not to do anything, because we have this massive infrastructure that's in front of us. And if we just walk away from it, what's going to happen to this huge investment? And so once you have an infrastructure in place, you're always going to try and use it. So it's an advantage to have we have a utility that we own as citizens of Duluth. It's a municipally owned utility, Comfort Systems, that delivers us natural gas, and that has served us well in the past. And this town used to be heated by coal and oil, and the air quality was so bad that one of my friends, Matt Doyle, who some of you may know, when he was a child, they left Duluth because it was too unhealthy for he and his siblings that had asthma, and they moved to the Southwest. Now people, now that we've changed that, and natural gas has been a part of that change where we've gone off of coal and oil, and so it's not a toxic, a toxic situation of having to breathe in town in the winter. Now we have great air quality. People move here for the air quality, so we have kind of an opposite situation. So gas has served us well in the past, but now we know a lot more about some of the problems with that. And one of the challenges is, if we're going to move to this electrified system, what happens to a gas utility that is just set up to sell gas? It is a really hard problem to wrap your head around. The business model of most utilities, and in fact, really for Comfort Systems as well, even though it's a municipally owned utility, it's a nonprofit because it's owned by the city, but its business model is to sell more things. In this case, more units of gas. On your bill, it's CCF, which is centrum cubic feet, 100 cubic feet. And that's similar to a therm if you've heard that. So those are units of gas. And you are supposed to sell more of that. That is the way the business model works. This can be a problem if we have folks that start to opt out of that system. And the cell phone is the kind of the big way people have thought about that in the past, where we had, some of you can probably remember when phones were owned by utilities in your own home, landlines. That wasn't that long ago. It's within my living memory even, where the utility owned one landline phone in your house. And think about how much upheaval the cell phone and cellular phones caused, and what that happened to a lot of these utilities we assumed had been around forever and we assumed would be around forever. So if you have early adopters of technology that sort of disrupts the system, let's say we had a technology that we'll talk about in a little bit called a heat pump that will allow you to come off of that. So in this case, we had a heat pump installed in a house that allows you to not use natural gas. You get less and less people on the system. You get some people opting out of the system altogether. You get less and less people on the system. And the thing about utilities is it's public infrastructure that we all pay into. The less people that are on the system, the higher the costs are for those people that are left. And then the utility eventually can't raise rates high enough. People, it's just too onerous for people to participate. And you have what is called, in theory, called the utility death spiral. I think that's really funny because it's funny because to me, because that is putting the real part about death on a corporation. And a corporation is not a person that dies. Corporations change all the time. And while we've had corporations that fail because of these kind of disruptions, others do fine and do better because they change their business model. So one thing we're going to have to try to think about in Duluth is, how can we change our business model? I think it's better to do that than change the planet, and far easier. And one thing I just want to note is that the planet is already changing our business model. And this is just a look at Minnesota and our winter temperatures, nighttime temperatures over time. So these are the daily lows. These are typically nighttime temperatures. And you can see they've continued to go up and up and up and up. This is over the last 130 years. If we plotted this just for Duluth, the angle of this graph would be even steeper because our temperatures have increased even more over that time period. And every time the nighttime temperature increases, guess what? You're not selling as much gas. If you're not selling as much natural gas, then everyone's cost has to go up. So the more our nighttime temperatures continue to increase, the less gas we're selling and everyone's rates continue to go up. So our business model is, in terms of our natural gas utility, is already being affected by climate change, even though we are a contributor to it. So how about we try and figure out a different way? Well, the good news is there are lots and lots of opportunities to start to take action on this conundrum. One is we had a wonderful kind of nation-leading act pass in the Minnesota legislature in 2021. It was quiet, and you probably heard a lot of, not a lot of other legislation that got through, But if you haven't heard of it, it's really a big act. And you probably hadn't heard of it because it's wonky to a lot of people. The ECO Act is an act that reforms our energy efficiency standards. We have energy efficiency standards that were kind of nation leading and established in 2007. That means all utilities, including gas utilities, have to have energy efficiency programs. They have to devote a certain amount of their budget to energy efficiency for the people they serve. And then they also have to have low income components where they're actually supposed to be helping low income folks within their communities. The ECO Act reforms that, and it allows a utility to fuel switch. That means if for instance, a gas utility has a customer that wants to switch to an electric heat pump, they can get credit for that switch, and then also in terms of their energy efficiency. That was not allowed in the last 15 years, and had really held up the kind of solutions that we need in terms of electrifying places that use natural gas. So that's super, super helpful. It also increased the amount of money going towards low income programs, which is really helpful in a place like Duluth. The other thing that's happened really in the last 2 years is that the federal legislation passed to assist with the pandemic, and also in terms of the infrastructure package that was passed last year, have come with really large amounts of money for weatherization. Weatherization is a industry term for insulating. These are hard solutions to make your home more efficient. And think about the envelope or the walls of your house. It's basically putting insulation in. It's sealing air leaks. It's any place where you're finding the building is it might be new windows or new doors. So it's making that home more efficient by improving the structure, and it improved the funding for that over in a degree in magnitude, so 10 times more. That's great, because at our previous level of funding, we were going to, with the national weatherization programs, we weren't going to get to all the homes that would qualify for that for 300 years with our previous funding. You times that by 10, maybe in 30 years we can do it if we can ramp up our processes. So that's fantastic. And again, in a place like Duluth, that is really important. And finally, Duluth itself has really committed over time to really working towards solutions on this. Mayor Emily Larson, in her State of the City address just a few weeks ago, made a commitment for Duluth to be net zero emissions by 2050. That's really important. Previously, it had been 80%, which was great when she had done that as well. And that was a fantastic commitment that we had. But to acknowledge this net zero is to say, we've got to do something about natural gas. It's really saying we can't just leave that on the table. And I'm going to quote in there what she said in her speech at the end, which is, and finally, we're asking comfort systems to prioritize energy efficiency and find economically feasible clean energy alternatives to natural gas. So Duluth's administration understands this issue and is asking for solutions and working on it, which is really, really great. Again, there's Mayor Larson with some of our MNIPL volunteers in the bottom picture. So those are some good policy opportunities. What are some of the technical opportunities? We already talked about weatherization, and efficiency is fantastic. So it's one of the first things people should do. I'm going to spend this time, the little time we have left, just talking about heat pumps. And I think all of you have a heat pump, even if you don't know it. If you have a refrigerator, you have a heat pump. What a heat pump does is pump heat from one place to another. So it's in the case of a refrigerator, it's moving heat from inside the refrigerator out of it. That's how it keeps it cool. And then there are coils on the refrigerator that are, if you touch them on the outside or put your hand close to them, don't touch them. Put your hand close to them on the outside, you'll feel that it's moving the heat outside of that refrigerator, right? That's what's happening. So a heat pump moves in both directions. So unlike an air conditioner or a refrigerator, it can also move heat back into a place. So we can have air source heat pumps, which is much like an air conditioner, and what the picture shows here, where you're just simply moving latent heat that exists in the atmosphere outside and then into your house through different fluids that have different properties, and you compress them. it seems like magic, and it feels like magic in some ways when you experience this. But they've really been around for quite a while. Many of you may actually have a air source heat pump in your home. It's called a ductless or a split air conditioning unit sometimes. And the utilities have been, particularly electric utilities, have been rebating those for many years in Minnesota. But in the past, they only operated down to about 40 degrees. And most people didn't even know they could provide heat to that temperature. So most people just use them for air conditioning. I know I have a neighbor right next door who didn't, she's had one the whole time I've lived here, which is 10 years, and didn't know that it could provide heat. She just used it for air conditioning. And I think a lot of people were in that situation. But it can provide heat as well. And now they can operate, these air source heat pumps can operate down to 15 below in terms of providing heat. That seems amazing, but yes, there's heat in the there's heat to be gained in the atmosphere when it's 15 below, which is astounding. The other astounding thing is they operate in terms of if you're looking at buying one, one of the things you ask about is what is its COP, or coefficient of performance. And unlike a gas furnace where you say, well, how efficient is that? And they'll say, that's 95% efficient, meaning of all the fuel getting put into it, there's 5% that's waste basically, and the other 95% is being converted into heat. Well, when you say someone has, or you say an air source heat pump has a COP of 3, which is not uncommon, that means for every unit of energy you put into it, you get 3 units of heat out of it. So that means if you compare apples to apples and you put that into efficiency rating, you're getting 300% efficiency. That means if you put in 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, you're getting 3 kilowatt units of heat. That sounds like magic, and it feels like it when you're in that situation, but you can see that you're not burning anything. Again, think about it. We're not burning anything at this point. We're just moving heat from one place to another. So all the energy is just moving heat, not burning anything. So it's a fantastic solution that you're seeing happening all over the planet. Heat pumps are really going to be the talk of and used in all kinds of things for the next 20 to 30 years. Incidentally, you don't have to just use heat pumps for draw things out of the air or draw heat out of the air. You can put it in the ground, have a ground source heat pump. We can use the huge battery that is the temperature of the ground, below a few feet where it's 50 degrees all the time, and then you can just heat that air up. That's a really fantastic solution. There are also heat pumps using just the temperature of water. So it might even be, there might be a heat pump that goes into Lake Superior at some point that heats our district heating, which is our next point. So heat pumps I think you're going to see that as one of the major solutions in Duluth. You can do them right now in almost all buildings with the air source heat pump because they can retrofit into most buildings. So it's a solution for everyone right now. And they are, because the cost of gas has gone up so much, they're pretty much affordable for everyone if you can get over that initial cost of installation. So again, heat pumps are probably the way things are going to be going. Other solutions, we already have district heating in this town. Our district heating serves a lot of the buildings in the downtown area. They're mostly commercial buildings. Could that be expanded? Yes. Do we have district heating in different parts of Europe where they expand it to all of town? And right now our district heating runs on natural gas and some coal in the winter. Could it run on heat pumps? Yes, we do have examples of that in Europe as well, and in cold climates like Norway, where they're using district heating by running heating coils into fjords, and then heating that, using the heat pumps to further heat that water as it moves around buildings. So that is something we can look at, and we're already ahead of the game because we have district heating in this town, which is unusual for the United States. You can put solar on your house, and because you do have to move this energy around somehow, and you do that through electricity. So if you put on solar PV or photovoltaics, solar that creates electricity, that is a solution. And this church, I just want to commend that, because you are looking at putting solar PV on your church. I know I've been helping some of your members over there as they examine this. And even if you have fossil fuel heat, you still have to use electricity to get it around your church, and solar is a way to reduce that thermal cost. Solar can also provide thermal qualities like space heating and like heating for water. And I think we'll be exploring some of that. And then maybe biomass is another solution. That is burning something. So I'm not sure that's something we want to do in mass, but in our part of the world where we have more trees than people, where we have a forest industry, forest products industry, that might be a solution for some folks, maybe for backup heat. And for some of these air source heat pumps, we know if it gets below 15 below, we can't really do heat very well. That's a problem in a really cold place like ours. So having some kind of backup system is essential. If you already have natural gas, you can use that as the backup. Biomass might be another way, like a wood pellet stove, to do that. So these are all kind of solutions that are there. The other thing to really state is that there are other reasons people should think about leaving natural gas and other places they can besides heating. These are just pictures from my own home, except for the stove. So we have a hot water you can heat by natural gas. You can also heat that with a heat pump, an electric heat pump. Same with a dryer. You can have natural gas with that or electricity, but you can also have a heat pump dryer, which is now available. And stoves. Stoves are the trickiest one because a lot of people love to cook with natural gas. I will say one big thing about that we know about natural gas that's a problem in our part of the world is that natural gas does cause really bad indoor air quality problems in certain situations. We've heard of people dying from propane or from natural gas. You know, I think we had a case of that already this winter, not in Duluth, but just outside of Duluth. So if you have natural gas appliances that are in the house and not vented outside, there are combustion products, you know, if you're burning it, but even if that methane is just getting in the house, it can cause real air quality problems. So it is really a health issue. And you want to make sure things are vented outside. If you do have a gas stove, you could move to an induction stove, which is what I have, where the top, instead of just a regular electric top, range, you have these places on the kind of the smooth top that are heated by magnets, and you put your pan on it. It just heats the pan. It's really fantastic. The Navy's been using it for years, and now it's available at a pretty reasonable rate for folks that want to switch over to that. So there are health reasons to do it. All of these have good paybacks. Most of them have really good paybacks. So if you have the money to move into it, it can be great, and it can be more convenient. It tends to be a nicer way. It tends to give you if you use a heat pump in your house, for instance, it tends to give you a heat that is evenly distributed over the house and is constant over time, which people really like. So there can be other convenience advantages. Last slide here, you know, in terms of what can you do on the personal side, if you haven't had a home energy audit, that is your basic checkup, you know, that you would get if you go in to see your doctor for a physical. You should get that for your home. Equilibrium 3 is a nonprofit in town that is someone that can do that for you, and it would give you a whole menu of what's going on in your home and give you some of these different options, including some of the efficiency low-hanging fruit that I referred to there. If you want more information on heat pumps, Minnesota CERTS, C-E-R-T-S, is a Minnesota government-funded organization that helps people understand clean energy options. They have some great literature on this. And then on the systemic side, you can support the mayor, support our administration that's really looking at comfort systems, asking them to do things different, providing some oversight on those efficiency programs, really looking at how they can leverage the low-income programs. Also at the state level, there's climate legislation moving forward you can support, and at the federal level. So you can find, if you want to support those, on our website under policy and action, there are ways you can just click and inform your legislators. I'll also just say that we're meeting with Senator Tina Smith on April 26, 11:15. We'll make sure everyone gets invitation for that. You can see that on our website right now if you'd like. And she's been a real champion on Build Back Better, which is the federal legislation that would incentivize people to buy heat pumps. It would give them money to do it. So, and I'll just end with, I think the best thing we can all do is learn from each other, talk to each other about what we've learned and what we value, and then join with others to advocate. And I just put the name of some other statewide organizations we we coordinate with. So I'll end the presentation there and really appreciate your time.